Welcome back. It's exactly 9:22 News and Views on Salam Media, and we do hope you've enjoyed all of the discussions we've had thus far on the show this morning. Next, we're going to be talking to political analyst Professor Maphunye, and we are going to be looking at negotiations between the ANC and the DA. Professor Maphunye is a political analyst and the right person to be talking about matters political. A very good morning to you. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me, and good morning to the listeners.
Lovely to have you here. Sorry that we couldn't get the video feed sorted out, but nonetheless, we do appreciate your time. Now, let me start by saying Ramaphosa to appoint his cabinet. We understand that on Sunday, negotiations between the ANC and the DA were at a very precarious level and has yet to be finalized. We also have read via Sowetan sister publication Sunday Times that the DA wants its leader, John Steenhuisen, to be the deputy president, as well as to be allocated 10 cabinet positions. Do you think that's going to be a possibility? If it does happen, what would be the repercussions regarding other cabinet members, members of parliament, and civil society? And the same question to be put is, if it doesn't happen, what will the outcomes look like?
Let's start with the simpler one. Is it possible? In an arrangement such as this one, Government of National Unity, which has got permutations of a coalition, because that's what people are saying still. We are not just looking at the Government of National Unity, but some version of a coalition. It is possible because I don't know whether we had this discussion before, but I keep talking about political horse trading, whereby once you enter into this type of situation, it's about what you give me and I can give you in return. And then what are we both satisfied with? Even when we are not satisfied, what else can we replace it with so that at least, we are relatively satisfied, the two of us, or many of us, across the different sides of the table. So is it possible? In this kind of arrangement, it is possible. However, the flip side is that it might take too long for the discussions to continue, especially because in spite of the fact that the ANC has been pushed to below 40%, by the voters, we know that it is a senior, partner in terms of this kind of, Government of National Unity, because it wanted to make sure that at least it gets to approach the parties that it believed would be able to still bring it back to power, although governing, of course, with the help of other parties. So to that extent, it does have some political mileage, some political weight that it brings to the table. And the same, by the way, should be said to the DA as well. We know that it still remains the second largest party in the country after these elections and even in previous elections. So there are just too many issues to consider. And these issues, in my view, I keep going to the word compromise and conciliation, because these parties, if they forget those two words, then we are heading into some kind of a stalemate, which I think the country is not happy and it's not waiting for.
Professor, let's put aside all of our views regarding leftist and rightist, different parties being very right-wing and other parties being very left-wing, etc., etc. We have two parties now that just come to the table, ANC and DA, and their views on politics and taking the country forward are very, very, very different. But how do you see this marriage working out regarding the DA's successes in the Western Cape, for example, and other successes that they have proven over the years? How do you believe these two parties coming together will serve the country? Can they serve the country well and take the country forward?
At the end of the day, if they become sober politically and if they just become realistic, this marriage, as you call it, excuse the pun, because as you know, with marriage, there are always sometimes sparks can fly between the married partners. Eventually, reality comes in to say, listen, what are we trying to do? We are trying to make this marriage work so that we have a home and we have peace in the family and so on. So if they can do that kind of thing and just be realistic and know that in the end, the bigger picture are the South Africans, the South African public, the national interest. Earlier, you alluded to the DA demand currently for the position of deputy president for Mr. Steenhuisen. I think at the end of the day, the parties, both parties, by the way, the DA and the EFF, and apparently the DA and the ANC, realize that they've got to make sure that they do not play hardball too much at the early stages of this kind of negotiations, but at the same time, they should not just be giving in to anything that the other partner is asking for. And by the way, we must not forget to factor in the IFP, which in some instances, I listened to the interviews by Mr. Sabisa, of the president of the IFP over the weekend. For me, he appears as more like what the two parties, the DA and the ANC, need, as some kind of a voice of reason. I'm not saying what they're saying, that they're saying is completely rational and reasonable, but because they are also having some interest in this the government of national unity. But I tend to think that if they bring in, such as the IFP, then these issues around demanding this post and demanding that post could just be ameliorated when you bring in another partner, which might actually just try to bring in some kind of conciliation and urge the parties to compromise, like the IFP. Now that they are actually inviting other new parties which have indicated that they would like to join in, the likes of the Pan-Africanist Congress and the likes, and of course to latch on to your point about the ideology. This is not, in my view, a situation whereby you can, enter into a hardball negotiations around the fact that you are just focusing on ideology, because there's also realism and reality that the South Africans did not give any party a clear majority. So therefore, you need to compromise on their ideological stance and think about the national interest. So therein lies the big issue and the big challenges about this, government of national unity. They can realistically, they have it, what it takes, relying on the 1994 examples of the first parliament of Madiba and the other, seasoned stalwarts across the political divide, whether they were national party or whatever. They were able to sit down and look at the bigger picture to say, our country has just come from a difficult past. Can we put them aside slightly and just make sure that we put together a government of national unity? And at that time, Nelson Mandela and his colleagues did not actually were not under pressure, to come up with that government of national unity, but they did. So I'm hoping that the parties this time around will also, go back to that kind of sobriety and be realistic and, of course, come up with a workable solution for the country.
We need to talk about the MK that have now come on board. We need to look at that dynamic as well. But before we proceed with that issue regarding MK, the GNU or coalitions, is not a new is not a new game as far as politics in Western countries are concerned in other parts of the world, and it works very, very well. What do we as South Africa then learn from a situation like Western governments that are made up largely of coalitions? Because as you've alluded to, and I have over the past few days in my different interviews, that we're talking about a government of national unity, but it really is about a coalitions of different parties forming a government. What is it that we can learn from other countries that have coalitions in place?
The main thing that we can learn is to think about the bigger picture, which is the national interest. In this case, we are talking, in the case of South Africa, obviously, we are talking about this, high unemployment rate. especially hitting, the most productive and prolific section of the population, which is the youth. Also, the very, very, highly accentuated social inequalities that we know are there, including poverty and unemployment and crime. So, to that extent, if they can keep their ball focus, they keep their focus on the bigger picture, which is the national interest, I think they will be able to find each other and compromise, such as we have seen in countries like Germany, countries such as the Netherlands, such as a country such as the United Kingdom, where if the conservatives and the Labour do not a party in the UK have at one stage were not able to to get an outward majority. In the end, they bring in other parties such as the Liberal Democrats or the Lib Dems, and then in the end, they are able to bring the coalition together. Of course, coalition government itself is, in my view, is not ideal. You need a party to win outright so that it becomes a strong party with a leader or a president or a government executive that can take decisions without necessarily having to always be consulting and always having some of their decisions being questioned or vetoed. So that is the main thing that we can learn from the outside countries. Of course, we must also not forget that there are also negative examples, such as some post-World War governments in France, as well as specifically in Italy, which were fractured. Almost every 6 months, you have government collapsing because the parties are not able to agree among themselves, and then therefore the snap election has to be called, the new fresh election has to be called. I hope we are not going as South Africa into that space, because as we are staring the 2026 local government election space, we dare not be having a fresh election at the national level and before we can go to 2029, because by my calculation, now that the 2024 elections are over, as a country we should be looking to 5 years from now, which is around May, June 2029. But if the parties do not agree, there's a likelihood, a very huge risk that the parties may not agree, in which case the president might be forced to call a fresh election not too long, 2.5 years, maybe 3 years before we reach that 5 years of 2029.
Okay, let's talk about the MK and a few other smaller parties who have taken this matter to the elections court regarding, in their words, rigged elections. Let's assume that it is found that the elections were rigged. What do you think is going to happen then? Does it mean re-elections, or only in those areas that were found to have probably evidence suggesting a rigging of the elections?
In 2019, about, I think there were 21, these parties, I stand under correction there. I was carefully watching this space after the IEC announced the elections. 21 parties said they are rejecting these elections are rigged and so on, and they are going to go to court. And then we quickly moved out. I was at the National Results Operations Center in Pretoria when we went to listen to their caucus. They were caucusing with their lawyer. And of course, eventually they said they don't want journalists, they don't want anyone else, among themselves, they are going to have their caucus. Fortunately, I was able to speak to some of the members of the parties. And then they told me that, look, when we were speaking to the lawyer, we discovered that the lawyer said the chances of us challenging these elections, after they've been accepted by the major parties, the likes of EFF, DA, and the ANC and others, not only that, also having been given a clean bill of health by the international, remember they were international observers. And then the lawyer said, look, you don't have a winnable case. You can challenge this thing, but you don't have a winnable case. Also, if you say you are challenging these elections, by the way, it has got cost implications to the country, and it will delay government. We won't have any government being appointed. And I think I would like to use the same logic about these parties that are saying they are challenging. Number one, I have looked at the International Election Observer report from SADC. This is the Southern African Development Community, the African Union, which is the continental body which normally does not just give a clean bill of health to an election, unless, of course, they've checked something. If they are not happy as the African Union, they'll give a qualified or maybe a very, very subdued type of, they'll just normally the election was peaceful. They'll not say it was free and fair. But all the others, including AISA, the highly respected institute in Africa called the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa, have given these elections a clear bill of health. Not only that, even citizen or domestic observers, there are so many, like the South African Election Support Network, they are here in South Africa. They have also said they did not see any rigging. Yes, they did see a lot of irregularities here and there, whereby the counting went too long, the queues and all those things. But if you ask me, is this on a scale or a multi capacity that can constitute rigging such that an election must be overturned? My answer would be no. So, and by the way, these parties, they say it's not clear. Even in 2019, the lawyer said, "Are you saying you want a revote or you want a recount?" Some of them were not even sure about what they want. Some will say, no, we want a revote, meaning that a fresh election, everything, declare everything null and void again. Is this possible under the current circumstances? My answer is no. Definitely, using the international election management best practices of how elections are held. We have had elections that are highly problematic in countries like Zimbabwe, but they were not overturned even by the African Union and SADC and others. And I don't think South Africa has had the worst. South Africa, actually, if you compare the 2024 elections with so many that we have seen in places like Nigeria and so on, I think the South African election management body, the EMB, has run elections very well. In spite of the teething problems of the voter management devices and the miscounting here and there. Perhaps if the parties were saying they would like a recount in certain voting stations, that, if you ask me, is possible. But again, we need sufficient evidence that can show that on a multitude, on a scale of irregularities that can be seen to constitute the need for a revote or a recount, that can be done.
Okay, then my final question to you is regarding the MK party. We do know that the former Western Cape Judge, President John Hlophe, has said that he's met with former President Jacob Zuma and will be sworn in as a member of parliament today, and he's going to be leading the MK party in parliament. The MK has instructed more than 100 of their members to withdraw from its reserve list of parliamentary candidates to lawfully replace them with 21 new people, including Judge John Hlophe. How is this going to impact on current talks between the ANC and the DA, and then, of course, other parties as well, the third largest party, which, of course, is the MK?
Obviously, now we are talking about parliamentary politics.
Yeah.
Previously, you and I were talking about extra parliamentary politics. Things that happen before these parties are in the chamber. Mm-hmm. What will obviously my immediate response about the inclusion of Judge Hlophe in the list of MPs to be sworn in today will obviously significantly strengthen the parliamentary caucus as well as the parliamentary section of the MK, and make it sure that, by the way, they mount effective opposition. Because, by the way, with the ANC going into government of national unity with the DA as well as parties such as the IFP and the others, which were previously part of the opposition, then the national opposition, then we have a new opposition, obviously, in the face of MK and maybe the EFF. Which have not joined, this government of national unity. To that extent, we are quite likely to have a very, very vibrant, very active one. We should expect, opposition being mounted by the MK particularly. However, that is what is to be expected. I think parliamentary politics are like that. We need vibrant opposition. Over the past 30 years, South Africa has not had a very, very vibrant opposition parties because of the political strength as well as the one-party dominance of the ANC in that parliament, whereby we have seen about 10 impeachment attempts by the opposition failing. simply because the ANC just used its, parliamentary majority. This time around, we should expect things to be better and to be different, because at the end of the day, what do we want as citizens? We want any governing party to be held to account to the citizens of this country who have voted, for that, to make sure that they run things in terms of accountability, and they also, focus on implementing what they promise the voters. So this is what I'm expecting. Of course, some people might not be happy about the fact that the MK is bringing in the likes of John Slope and so on, given his track record, in the Western Cape, judicial circles. But herein lies a different issue, that the man is now going to be a parliamentarian, and we expect that, they will be able to hold the governing coalition, or the governing government of national unity, to account, and be able to, show what they can do for their own voters. Because remember, they also represent a sizable part of the voters who chose MK. We must not forget that MK has got a legitimate right to be in that parliament as well.
Okay, I think that's where we're going to leave it. And we're going to see, on the one hand, we have the parliamentarians, the members of parliament. On the other hand, we now anxiously await the names of the announcement of the new cabinet and who's going to be in place. And like you said at the beginning of the interview, there is going to be a lot of horse trading. And I should also imagine a lot of this would depend which, the parties allocated number of seats in parliament, number one, and then also which cabinet, which members of different parties are going to be holding cabinet posts. So that's really something that we await with much anticipation, and see how this all plays out. Thank you indeed for being with us. Any parting remarks you have for us this morning?
My parting remarks are that South Africans must be patient. If you and by the way, we know that there are people who did not vote who are now complaining. And we normally say in this space, if you do not vote, do not complain thereafter. If you do not vote, do not go and toy in the streets. So now is the time for those people that have voted to wait until the public representatives are in place. And most importantly, Section 91 of the Constitution empowers the president to appoint deputy ministers, the president, and so on. Let him be given that space, the prerogative that he has to exercise that prerogative without necessarily being, criticized and so on. It is only once those parliamentarians and the ministers are in place that then maybe we can say, okay, right, why did he appoint this one and that one? But in the end, we have to wait for that process because it is constitutionally sanctioned and it allows the president to, exercise that prerogative.
Professor Maphunye, thank you indeed for your very deep insights on politics. But of course, that's what we expect from you, don't we? Being a political analyst, that's the reason why we have you on the show. We do appreciate being with us and your thoughts on the current situation in South Africa regarding our MPs and the makeup of our cabinet, which you're hoping is going to be announced in the next couple of days or possibly even weeks. But we wait and see. So you go well, and thank you once again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
9:46 News and Views, moving on, almost at the end of the show this morning. We will be talking with Fauzia Peer, Vice President of Minara Chamber of Commerce. And we're also trying to get hold of a journalist to talk to us about the current situation playing out in Gaza, inshallah. So please do stay with us.